Oh.
My name is Rima Neshashimi, and I'm founder and president of Global Hope 365.
My name is Dr. Estera Borska, and I am the CEO and founder of Teach, Train, Transform International.
And together, we created this show to bring awareness about child marriage, human trafficking, and how to prevent future victims and help people move from trauma to hope.
This podcast will air every first and third Tuesday of the month here on OCTalkRadio.
All right, so let's get to our first featured guest, Dr. Caroline Heldman. Welcome.
It is so good to be here. Thank you both for hosting this.
Sure. How was the traffic coming all the way from the valley?
It wasn't bad at all.
All right.
Nice.
We love
Welcome. We're excited that you're here.
Yes, we sure are. Carol and I have known each other now for a while. A mutual friend has introduced us to each other. And I wanted our listeners to learn a little bit about Caroline. She's the program chair at Occidental College, co-founder of Stand With Survivors, a political commentator on CNN and CBS, and many more. And Caroline, we'd love to hear from you about what the other things that I didn't say, because we want them to learn from you.
A lot of my, I would say, volunteer work is around survivor advocacy. So Stand With Survivors, we are a national network of survivor activists. We actually are a little global. We have some folks in France and the UK, but survivor activists who show up for survivors in the courtroom and beyond. And that means that we do media preparation and training for survivors who are going up against maybe high profile or celebrity rapists. We also show up in the courtroom and provide survivor support while survivors are going through trials. And we pass legislation, policy. Our first big initiative was to abolish the time limit on prosecuting rape in California, so SB 813, and that was almost 10 years ago now. And since that time, we've worked on about a dozen major pieces of legislation. We view California as like the petri dish. If we can get it done here, then we become the gold standard for the rest of the nation.
Absolutely. Can you tell the listeners more about that bill that we passed?
Yes. You're thinking of AB 218, I'm guessing. So AB 218 was a bill that a coalition of survivor activists worked on, and it opened a look-back window. So folks might not know this, but in the state of California and every state in the union, there are time limits on when you can come forward with rape or allegations of rape. And in California, it used to just be a few years. Now it's abolished. But let's say that you experienced sexual violence 2 decades ago. It was not retroactive. It doesn't go back in time. So AB 218 was passed, went into effect right before COVID hit. And this particular bill that was passed by Lorena Gonzalez, she carried water, if you will. She carried the bill for survivors on this. It opened a look-back window, and it allowed you to bring a case, even if it happened 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago.
Amazing.
This is such a major
That's
step
groundbreaking.
forward. Exactly.
Groundbreaking, because survivors take so long to even report or have the courage to report, and not having a time limit is crucial.
Absolutely, absolutely. And since you mentioned that bill, let's talk about the rampant child abuse in LA County, which is the title of this podcast, right, Estera? Okay.
That's right.
So can you help our audience understand the significance of this case and why it has such a profound impact? Not a lot of people heard about this. And then while I was researching information, the latest about it, I also found out that the same thing is happening in San Diego County.
That's right.
Child abuse in the juvenile detention centers administered by the county. So tell us more about the rampant child abuse at the 3 LA Juvenile Detention Center administered by LA County.
And as you point out, it's happening in San Diego. So child sexual abuse is happening in any institution that serves children, right? Because predators, as we know, will embed themselves in institutions
where there's children.
Especially vulnerable children,
That's right?
Young kids of color who are in really bad situations, like the majority of the demographic population in the LA juvenile detention centers. Very vulnerable children. They are targets, marks for pedophiles. And what we discovered, okay, so just again for context, AB 218 passes, it opens this look-back window. All of a sudden we get a flood of cases, and this is for child abuse victims, children in the system. We've opened some other look-back windows for adults, but this is specifically kids could come forward. And what immediately happened is the 3 youth detention centers in Los Angeles, which are no longer in operation, we found that over 5 decades, 50 years, there were 6,800 very serious allegations. Now, these are just the allegations of folks that came forward, right? Which the LA County Board of Supervisors agreed to a settlement of $4 billion. That's with a B. Let's add to that then you include foster care and LAUSD, and we get up to about 11,000 cases over the last half a century of kids who were seriously damaged in terms of sexual abuse in these facilities. So LAUSD would be in the educational system, the foster system, and the youth detention centers.
11,000, you said.
11,000, and that's a low-end figure, right?
Yes.
These
These are the people who came forward.
That's right. After many decades. And many of them were children at the time. They were in systems where they didn't have any power, they didn't have any voice, and if they were to come forward, they would face retaliation. They're essentially locked up, right? And so what happens in these youth detention centers, in fact, I was having a conversation with someone who was incarcerated in a youth detention center about 30 years ago in LA, and he was telling me, it was like, if you spoke up about what was happening, they would put you in solitary confinement, which they didn't call it that, right? They weren't supposed to be doing that with children, period. So it's abuse beyond sexual violence.
It's abuse of power.
That's right.
It's abuse of power.
And so,
holding people back, not having a voice to be able to speak against the power.
Exactly, Dr.
So
B.
speaking of abuse of power, has anyone been held accountable for that abuse?
And here is the kicker. We don't know. And I think it's really important to note a couple of things. This settlement was passed by the LA County Board of Supervisors. 5 women, amazing women, many of whom we've worked with on previous legislation, who have really made strides for survivors. And I actually have my phone in front of me because when they passed this settlement, I think it's important to, if we have time, share some of their words. Okay. So Catherine Barger, head of the LA County Board of Supervisors, during the hearing where this was passed, actually had a lot to say. She said, quote, I never would have imagined that persons hired to be the safety net and care for the most vulnerable could or would abuse their position of power in this way. It angers and sickens me, and we must ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. Hilda Solis, also on the LA County Board of Supervisors, said we need to root it out and we have to be swift about it. Janice Hahn, quote, the settlement to me is really about victims. Holly Mitchell, incredible powerhouse who has been supportive many times over the years for survivors, talked about how it was systemic sexual abuse and it involved, quote, power, control, and submission. And Mitchell said employees found to have committed such acts should be terminated immediately, argued that their pension should be forfeited. Quote, a financial payout is one thing, but ultimately everyone wants the behavior to stop. So here's the problem. They've now turned, they are now lobbying. So imagine, and I know it's hard to wrap your brain around this.
Advocating?
The LA County Board of Supervisors who advocated for this settlement, once the price tag came in and more survivors came forward than they were imagining would come forward, instead of paying that debt and making it right for these survivors as much as we can, money can never fix trauma.
Right.
They're now lobbying the state legislature to pass new legislation.
Advocating, yeah.
Silences survivors and makes it harder for us to come forward, moving forward. It is like a 180-degree flip, and we can talk about some of the pressures behind that, but it is quite shocking to see people who have clearly stood with survivors for so long now advocating to actually make California a magnet for sexual predators of children.
Wow.
2 days ago, I was watching TV, and we heard how the LA District Attorney now wants to vacate the $4 billion
Wow.
settlement that they approved. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So Nathan Hochman, who we did a number of press conferences with, and said that he would be an advocate for survivors, has also not at all been an advocate for survivors of sexual violence. So it's not surprising to me. This is a money play, right? And the claim is that a number of false claims have come forward. As survivors of sexual violence, what is one of the number one myths that is out there? That we're not telling the truth. And so they are exploiting the idea that survivors don't tell the truth in order to try to vacate this. But let me just bring logic and facts into this. Who agreed to this settlement. The LA County Board of Supervisors and the district attorney.
They sure
so
did.
If there's an issue with false claims, guess who crafted the deal and guess whose responsibility that is. So now I'm going to switch gears. I'm a taxpayer. If there are a bunch of fraudulent claims, which, by the way, the LA Times did a whole investigation, they found only
8, right?
Yeah, and maybe 9 out of 11,000, right? So that is not a pattern. And that's just
There's enough of the $4 billion left, folks. Let's get it together.
Exactly, Dr. B.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at this as a taxpayer saying, wait a minute, if there's really fraud, again, there's not, but if there really is, that's on you. I don't want to be paying money for nothing, right? I don't want to be paying money for fraudulent claims. So when they structured the case, they should have addressed that. So it is wild to us survivors that they're now turning around. And let's talk about exactly what they're doing really briefly, right? They are lobbying the state legislature to do 2 major things with cases moving forward. One is to put limits on what survivors can get. And at the end of the day, money is just a small token. It cannot fix the damage that's done from trauma.
That they went through.
That's right.
Years of trauma.
Lifetime.
Hey,
Shifts the
Rima,
trajectory.
I hate to interrupt, but you do have a caller that has a question here.
We have
All
a
right.
call in.
Yeah.
All right.
Are you still there with us, caller?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, tell us your name and what's your question.
My name is Paula. I'm calling from San Diego. And my question is, actually, I would like to know if any of these abusers are still working at their job, or were they fired, or were they transferred to some other places, like they did in the Catholic Church, where they keep taking them from one place to the other. And how deeply were those cases investigated before brushing them out, or how does the system work like that?
Oh,
Great
Wow.
question. I'll let them answer it. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, this is where we were headed, right? Well, so
Right.
Paula, what a great question. The answer is very simple. We don't know. The LA County Board of Supervisors put in a corrective action plan, but there is no evidence that it has been put into place. So here's what we don't know.
Didn't they hire a PR firm?
Oh, they spent, I don't know, almost $500,000, we estimate, on a public relations firm to, instead of spending that money on transparency and fixing the system, they spent it on lobbying Sacramento in order to make it harder for survivors moving forward. So we don't know who these people are. We don't know whether or not our tax dollars are still going to their pensions. We imagine they are, because if they had actually made effective change, wouldn't they be shouting it from the mountaintops? The fact that they're not doing that, we just don't know. There's no transparency. We don't actually know the number of predators still in the system. We don't know what corrective action they've taken to make sure they're not still bouncing around. And in fact, I brought up Lorena Gonzalez's name earlier. She now has shifted. She passed AB 218 that made all of this possible. She's now the head of a very powerful union which represents some of these employees who would be hopefully held accountable. She's now lobbying against AB 218, or she is lobbying in favor of making it harder for survivors moving forward, and her union is. So it is this wild reversal of position. And yeah, Paula, you've hit the nail on the head. We actually don't know if any mechanisms have been put into place to prevent this from moving forward. And there's been no transparency about what they found. My goodness, as a taxpayer, again, putting on that hat, if there are abusers in our LAUSD, and let's extend it, you're in San Diego, right? Orange County, throughout the state of California, and frankly, the U.S., we need national legislation, but I'm off track. Just getting back to California, we need to know what is happening in our schools, in our correctional facility, youth detention centers, and in our foster system.
Right.
And we don't have that.
And we owe it to our children to be able to protect them, especially from the powers at hand when we put them in those vulnerable situations. And so it is our job to be able to protect them. And when we fail at that, throwing money at it is the first problem. So the first thing I would like to say to her, initially when she did the bill, which sounds like a great bill, but some of the protective factors were not put in place. And so throwing money at the problem was just the first step. Figuring out how to really get help to those victims who came forward, I think, is a second step. As a mental health professional, I'm thinking money is just the start. And even that ended up going backwards, which is sad.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think there are three things here, right? One is fixing what happened in the past. That's the settlement. The second thing is transparency about what transpired, because we can't actually have a public reckoning over this if we don't understand the depth of the problem.
And both you and I, Carolyn, were members of, we're in press conferences where we said, release the records. Release the records. How are the taxpayers going to know, just like Caroline in LA County, know that these perpetrators, rapists, whatever, child abusers have been held accountable?
That's right. And then moving forward, we need mechanisms of accountability. So we don't have step one. They're trying to vacate that. No step two, transparency. No step three, mechanism of accountability. So our public officials are absolutely failing us. And these are some of the most, wonderful feminist, pro-survivor women leaders that we've had. And so I talked a little bit about the fact that they're trying to cap the money, but the second thing is the most troubling. They are trying to, the LA County Board of Supervisors and others, the unions, for example, are lobbying Sacramento to raise the standard for bringing new cases forward. So the current standard
which is cases in public
facilities. That's right. It could be schools, foster care, youth detention, any public facility, coaching that's state funded, local. So anything that is a state institution serving children, what they want to do is raise it from preponderance of evidence, which is more likely than not that it happened, so it's about 50% plus a scotch, up to clear and convincing, which is 75%. Now, it might sound like, that sounds reasonable, except in these sorts of cases, it's not. Obvious. There's very rarely physical evidence, right? Because the physical evidence tends to look very similar to, you can't tell consent from physical evidence. So our rules of evidence mean that these cases are really hard to have that level of evidence for. And what will happen if this goes into effect is it'll be the first state in the nation that has a higher standard for proving sexual violence in state institutions than in private institutions, for example. It will be the only state in the union that has such a high standard. And if I'm a smart pedophile, and they do tend to be pretty smart, I'm a perpetrator, I am going to be drawn to California because I know that accountability will be virtually impossible.
Yeah, that's awful to think about. And the fact that I think a part that I keep going back to that feels the most heartbreaking for me is the fact that besides accountability, there isn't any avenues for healing for these people. And if you truly understood trauma, and you truly understood sexual trauma even, you would know that most people are in denial and have a really hard time coming forward, not the opposite way around, right? So most people are not going to say, this happened to me unless it happened, right? It's a type of abuse that is most reported and usually 90% true. And it's because it's very difficult to say that. So if someone is coming forward to say that, most likely there's a lot of depth, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain there. And having to admit that is hard within itself, especially against power, no matter how many years has gone by. So the fact that there's no justice, but also being accused of lying is also a really hard thing, and reporting child abuse.
Yeah.
And sexual child abuse.
And you're bringing up the fact that this is really the only crime where you come forward and it's held against you, right? It's the only crime that
There's
I know
so much
of.
shame around it.
Yep. The victim's put on trial in the trial of public opinion. Your friends, your family, the exhaustion from just coming forward, you tend to get blamed and shamed, and what were you doing? That what load of responsibility do you hold? And I can't imagine going up to somebody who has had their house broken into and grilled them on what their responsibility was. This is a crime we treat very differently. And you're so right that we know that when someone comes forward, according to the FBI's own stats, 92% of the time there is corroborating evidence. So
Right.
at most, false reporting is 8%, but it's probably much smaller than that. And then we know that when two people come forward to report the same person, it goes up to almost 100. It's 99 point something percent, right?
Correct.
So the idea that false reporting is common is ludicrous. We all know what happens. We, in fact, try to avoid the survivor label because we know the stigma that comes with it.
And
But
it's a
let's
pattern.
get back to, I just want to emphasize that, let's say with the 8,000 cases, is it 8,000 or 8,800 from the 3 LA juvenile detention centers?
6,000.
6,000. Thank you for the correction. There were proven by the LA Times 8 to 9 fraudulent cases.
Wow.
So a minuscule amount. And so my question to you now, Dr. Heldman, is how can we and the audience help you and the survivors to bring their voice forward? What do we need to do to make sure that their voices are heard and that accountability is still investigated and implemented, right? And the records are released, because in the other very public case, the Epstein case, the demand was release the files, release the records, release the records. We need these records to be released. So what can we do and the public can do to help you and your work and the survivors?
And that's a great question. And I know so many who are listening are thinking, what action can we take? So many things, but let's keep it simple. Rima and I are on the front lines where we are going to protest around this. We protested outside of members' offices who've been trying to push this draconian rollback of survivor rights in Sacramento. So the first thing you can do is you can contact your assembly member or your senator or both and tell them to oppose the efforts to roll back survivor rights. There isn't a specific bill number. It's actually pretty shady. It's being done behind the scenes, but tell them to stop this effort. They will be fully aware of what you're talking about. The second thing you can do is show up at the join us, Stand with Survivors and the California Survivors Coalition, which is a network of survivor activist organizations in the state, including Rima's organization. Show up with our calls to action. You can actually sign up and get alerts. We have testified before the LA County Board of Supervisors. We've led protests. We have done letter writing campaigns. We've lobbied now twice in Sacramento.
You've advocated.
We have. We've gone and we've said that we need to make sure that this does not happen. This does not pass, right? Because this would be the biggest rollback of survivor rights in California history. So we need to make sure that
What's your
happen.
website, if you can? What's your website so people can go there and sign up? Survivoralliance.org. Also, if you just type in Stand with Survivors, you can follow the organization. You can follow me personally, Caroline Heldman, at all of the handles. You can email me at drcarolineheldman@gmail.com, and I can connect you to that network. You can also contact all of Rima's various points of contact. We would love to get more people involved in this fight because we think it's going under the radar, the media radar. Yes.
Rima, you mentioned that we had one caller already here today. They knew the number, I think, from the last time. You asked that I give out our instructions and numbers if there's anybody that has any further questions. So let me do that. Let's take a second here and everybody catch their breath because this is pretty startling stuff here. OCTalkRadio, our direct call-in number is this, 949-824 1200 949-824-1200. 824 just happens to be UCI. So if you can't remember 824, remember UCI. 949-824-1200. Now, unfortunately, it's just me. So if 3 people or 300 people suddenly call, I can only answer one, and the other ones will all go to voicemail. I'm hoping that we don't get a sudden flurry or flood of phone calls here because I can only grab one at a time here. But that's the number. If you did have any other questions, you can call in. And next time we should come up with some other ways like tweet or text.
We actually do have other ways, don't we, Zena?
I think you have one of your associate assistants here. What if they want to is there a way they can text in a question or someplace they can?
They can email.
They can text. We're on Instagram.
And Facebook.
Yeah, so, Instagram and Facebook.
And what are those? What are those?
From Trauma to Hope.
From Trauma to Hope, there's an Instagram page and there's a Facebook page. So and you're monitoring those right now? If somebody saw it?
Yes, Zena is basically making sure that if there are any questions coming in on those pages on Instagram and Facebook for our podcasts, that she'll let us know right away.
Okay. Well, lots of ways that you can get involved. We're still working out the mechanics of all this. This is a new show that obviously reaches a lot of people and touches a lot of people. So I'm sure there'll be people trying to reach us There were the last time when we just did an introductory show, and everybody's like, how do we call? How do we get in? We're working on that, but for now, you can call that number or you can go text through those
Yes, we also have an email. We'll create an email that
there you go.
We'd love to do a great write-in because I feel like there's so many stories, and what Rima and I really, our vision for this show is really to create a place where people can write in their stories, where they can share their deep felt secrets and things they want to heal from, and what they can bring to the table for us to really talk about and discuss, and the type of speakers that we can bring on, the things that we want to be able to tackle and really help people grow and heal. And so we will have an email where you can write in your stories, write in your questions, write in your comments, anything that you want to share.
Because we've even talked about doing like what we used to call in radio a mailbag show, a call-in show, where people, maybe you don't want to call in the moment, maybe you weren't listening to it live, you're listening to it later, and you want to, through one of the podcast channels or on the social media channels, lots of ways to still stay involved if you didn't catch the live episode. But right now we're live, and we're standing by if you want to call us, 949-824-1200. Operator.
I have a question from someone from last time.
Okay.
Where they said, from what is your perspective, Rima's and I, and now we can bring it to our featured speaker, what are the greatest barriers that prevent survivors from healing, and what needs to change so that more people can access the support, the safety, and hope they deserve? So this is about talking about barriers to survivor healing.
That is such a great question. I think the biggest barrier to survivor healing is the fact that we live in a rape culture where we do not take this seriously as a crime. And the best evidence that we have that we don't take it seriously is surely the glorification of sexual violence and the eroticization of sexual violence with sexy corpses and all of these crime shows, and just the way that we have eroticized sexual violence. But I think the biggest way that we know that we live in a rape culture is that out of every 100 rapes that happen, about 1% will ever see a day inside a jail cell. And as somebody who practices restorative justice, obviously incarceration is not even the best, and certainly not the only solution to this. But in our culture that doesn't practice restorative practices, it's a very obvious indicator we don't take it seriously. And so what survivors come up against, because we live in a rape culture, we tend to blame and shame them, and they run into
the victims, you mean?
The victims. We run into all sorts of myths about sexual violence. So the myth that survivors don't tell the truth, that survivors, because they waited to report, they're not telling the truth, even though it's often a matter of overcoming just decades of trauma. Most survivors, by the way, never report to any sort of authorities. About 30% report at some point. And when they encounter that system, they are not met with a system that will provide them justice. In fact, Susan Estrich wrote about the second rape that happens when you go through the justice system. And I would say that it's
the second rape. Interesting.
Isn't
that's
that
profound?
Horrifying?
Yeah, that's profound, because you do have to relive it in many ways. I did the spoken word. Maybe one day I'll share it on our show, called the eye gate of the survivor, because it's learning the eye gate of the survivor and everything that they've been through. But life happens on 3 planes: the past, the present, and the future. And when something horrific like that happens to you, any type of trauma, or there's always messages that we say to ourselves. So not only did you experience it in the past, you feel it in the present, and it impacts your future, because it impacts your sense of identity and how you feel about yourself, and that there is deep-rooted shame and hurt and guilt, and that impacts 99% of our behaviors.
Can I interject a question here?
Before you ask, Paul, I just want our listeners to know, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. B?
Yeah. Absolutely. So
why you speak from authority and from knowledge.
Yes. So
and from practice.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I've been in the field for almost 2 decades. My youngest client was 3 years old. My oldest was 89.
Which field?
The mental health field. So when I came out of my master's program, before I even did my doctoral degree, I was deeply saddened and hurt, because I thought, why isn't anybody healing? How come there's people holding these deep emotional wounds for 10, 20, 30 years, and there's still this deep pain and hurt and emotional reactivity? And so I went on a huge journey to figure out why. Youngest client was 3, oldest was 89, wanted to understand the gamut of the field, and basically it was so profound that what I found, it doesn't matter the age, the class, and where you come from, it impacts the way we feel about ourselves and the way we view the world. And when those 2 things are impacted, everything is impacted. The relationships we get in, the way we get up in the morning, the way we get dressed, the relationships we engage in, the ones we don't, 99% of our behaviors. And there isn't a lot of trauma work now that really helps people fix those deep identity wounds from their trauma, especially sexual trauma. And we really need to understand that it's about healing that sense of identity and dealing with the people who wronged and hurt us. finding freedom from the skeletons in our closet of our mind, especially when it comes to sexual violence, because there's such deep-rooted hurt around the people who have wronged and hurt us in those situations. And being able to rewrite those narratives, being able to make sense of it is what is important.
So what's the first step of healing?
The first step of healing is being willing. I tell my clients all the time, the only one thing I need from you is the willingness to be able to see these hard things and be able to work through them. The first step, I always say there's 2 stages to healing, 2 steps to healing, creating safety in our brain and flexibility in our thinking. The synapses in our brain are the connections. And when they're too close together because of trauma, there's rigid thinking, a lot of black and white thinking. And so what good healing does is we have to create flexibility around those stories and separate ourselves from those people's brokenness who hurt us and say, everything I told myself of what they did to me is a lie. That isn't true. That is not true about me and who I am. And so when we fix those narratives, the way the brain remembers it is different. And that's what truly helps people heal. I have something called neuromemory modification trauma therapy I'm starting the research on. And it's been amazing to see the breakthroughs that people are having by doing this work and healing those deep identity wounds. So I'm just really humbled by that whole process.
5 minutes left in our program. You still have time to call in, 949-824-1200. In the meantime, I got to ask one question, and then maybe this will lead to more thoughts. Your guest mentioned a couple of things that I was just flabbergasted, and I don't deny that it's probably true, that we live in a rape culture. That's a harsh appraising of American culture, and yet you look at, yes, TV shows and movie shows and all this other stuff. And then the other thing you mentioned was, do you guys actually show up in court if the person who raped you is a celebrity, is a powerful figure? Do you show up to give support? Because I would think that would be even, how do you stand up to somebody who's big and powerful and famous and whatnot here?
So we make a point of showing up to celebrity trials because I think a lot of people think, because you are coming out and telling your truth about someone who has a lot of fame and power, you must just have scores of people supporting you. The opposite is true. What we find, and we go to low-profile trials as well, of course, what we find is that celebrity trials, friends and family are terrified to show up because of the amount of sustained abuse they will experience. So let's just talk very briefly about what happens in a celebrity trial, right? Mm-hmm. Or all trials. The reason so few of these cases come forward is that in a court of law, it doesn't matter a celebrity or not, it has nothing to do with justice, right? So the defense attorney knows that their goal is 2 things, and it becomes very obvious after you sit in enough of these trials. The first is they want to invoke rape myths with the jury because they know they have an entire pool of people coming from a rape culture sitting in front of them, and all they have to do is tap into rape myths about she was asking for it, it's her responsibility, she's lying. And so the first thing they do is they invoke the rape myths, and they do it in not so subtle ways, which we don't have time to go into, but it just becomes very obvious. And the second thing they're doing is they're assassinating her character, because if she's not a good person, it doesn't matter if she was raped, right? We don't take this crime, we just don't consider it to be a real crime. And it has a lot to do with gender and power dynamics, which is a deeper conversation. But what happens in celebrity trials is invariably they hire crisis PR teams, and these PR teams will hire people to come to the courtroom to harass survivors and their supporters in the courtroom, but more importantly, they will harass them online. And it's death threats, it's threats of sexual violence, sometimes showing up at their houses, doxing them. Attorneys will often, accidentally put her name in, even though she's supposed to be a Jane Doe.
Yeah.
But they pay good money for this, and I don't think we understand this enough, that when we're going into a celebrity trial, we're going up against millions of dollars being spent to discredit her in the court of public opinion. And I'll just bring up the most obvious example that we found out about. I think a lot of this became apparent, the Johnny Depp trial, where they took a very classic case of abuse and reactive abuse, and they made them both the same instead of one being the abuser and the other engaging in abusive behavior in response to that. And they made Johnny Depp, it was like muddy the water. They made them both villains. They won in the court of public opinion, whereas in the UK, they didn't allow that to happen, and it was very clear who the abuser was.
And I don't want to open another rabbit hole here, but we're doing this in July of 2026, if you're listening forward. In the last 6 months, we've had 2 major politicians drop out because of rape accusations. We've had now 2 high social influencers were just arrested. They're trying to be extradited.
That's right.
On this. It's not like this doesn't happen a lot. Why? What is it about? You would think celebrities would do everything they could to stay away from this kind of image, and yet there seem to be too many of them perpetrating this. Is that because they feel like they can get away with it? They can do anything?
Money doesn't buy healing. It buys a lot of things. It doesn't buy healing.
But you're in a place of power. You think you're immune to persecution.
That's what I'm wondering, yeah.
And the other thing what I wanted to say about the rape situation is that the younger generation is watching porn. And they go from regular porn to more violent and violent porn. So they think what they see, and there's research, a lot of research about that. Our kids are watching porn. And that, the research indicated, that had led the women or the girl or the young girl's side from not reporting that because they think this is normal, from not reporting rape because they think it's normal. And from the male side, they think, yes, that's the way to do things because they're seeing it, so they think it's normal. So we need to address that angle too. And I know a few speakers, featured guests that we can have here that can talk about this and the effect of porn on the mind and the actions of the younger generations here in the U.S. and globally.
Clearly, you've given us food for thought and perhaps a tease at the next shows coming up here. I'm telling you, this is not something that can be covered once, and it's startling for me as a man listening to this and saying, do we really live in a rape culture? Is this how we're all raising our children and my grandchildren, all this stuff, to accept this, to view this as normal? Through all the things that you've discussed here, watching celebrities, watching porn, watching people get off meaning they didn't get prosecuted and stuff here.
Get away with it.
Get away with it. Right? So, unbelievable. All right, we've got to wrap up here. Let's go around the horn. You have one more comment you said here?
No, I don't have a comment, but I wanted to thank our featured guest here, Dr. Caroline Heldman. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Rima Nashibi, founder and president of Global Hope 365.
And I'm Dr. Borska, Teaching Transform International.
And listen, when I say around the horn, let's go around one more time and give everybody a chance to plug how to reach you and to continue this conversation. We'll start with Rima here. How do they reach you if they want to learn about the work you do at Global Health 365?
So you can go to globalhope365.org. You can email ala@globalhope365.org to learn about everything that we do and how to get involved.
There you go.
Because as Caroline indicated, you have to get involved in order for us, 1, prevent trauma from happening, and 2, support survivors.
That's right.
And you, Dr. B, works on more of the hope end here.
That's right. You can reach me at esteraborska.com and know more about my work, and would love to answer any questions you have. And like we said earlier, we're going to make a Trauma to Hope email where you can send us your stories, your questions and comments and concerns. So it's all in one place that we can address during our shows.
And your guest, how do they want to support, and if they want to learn about the work you do and support it in some way, shape, or form? What are you looking for? Are you looking for just awareness? Are you looking for dollars in donation to continue the work? Are you looking to advocacy? You mentioned all these bills and things going through. How should people get involved in what you're doing beyond just waking up?
We're not asking for donations, but we're definitely asking for people to participate in the process. So survivorsactionnetwork.org or Dr. Caroline Heldman, so Dr. Caroline Heldman @gmail.com.
Wow. Well,
thank you
I look forward to hearing more about this. It's an eye-opening conversation here. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And we'll see the next one in a couple of weeks here.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Wow. I don't know if you were as mesmerized, I would say traumatized, as awakened. Whatever the correct verbiage is, I'm sitting here with aghast as I listen to what's happening out there. And I hope that you'll join us because there is a lot of discussion. We need to understand what trauma is out there and to offer some hope. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to sharing this with others and coming back again. as we continue to explore From Trauma to Hope, a podcast about preventing trauma and healing lives, right here on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studios here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.